Buju Heyushka Washtewi, Red Sky Woman, Indigenous, Makwa, Dodam, Wood Mountain, Lakota Nation, Treaty 4 Territory, Saskatchewan. My given name is Leah Gazan. I teach at the University of Winnipeg, and I just wanted to, and I do many other things. I'm a well-known troublemaker here and around the country fighting for fundamental Indigenous human rights. But I just wanted to very briefly tell you about a second name as a segue into the panel. So I have two names. One is translated Good Peacemaker Woman, but the second one is Red Sky Woman. And I was given that name a few years ago when I was fasting, went on a fast, a 4-day fast, by a woman named Judy De Silva, who's a well-known grandmother who's fighting for her waters and forests in Grassy Narrows. And she said, I'm giving you this name for some of the work that you do fighting to end violence against Indigenous women and girls, because no matter where you are at night, no matter where anybody is at night, we all share the same sky. And that's a good reminder that we're responsible for each other, that no matter where we are, we have a similarity. We share that sky, and that means that we're responsible for each other, and we need to take care of each other. So with that, I'll pass it on to my brother from another mother, Michael.
What's up, everybody? My name is Michael. It's an honor to be hanging out with these rebel rousers here today. I am a born and raised North Ender. My family is originally from Shamattawa in northern Manitoba. I'm a product of Manitoba's child welfare system and passionate about doing what we can to amplify the voices and the perspectives of young people that have been in care. And I'm the founder of a group called AYO, Aboriginal Youth Opportunities, which is primarily made up of urban, Indigenous, inner-city young people, majority of whom have come from CFS. And we're a solutions-oriented group of individuals that are passionate about systems change and take what we call a trans-partisan approach, where we work with every political party to take all the good ideas from all the different political parties and say, this is how we can all live and work together. And I also am currently sitting on the Manitoba government's Child and Family Services Reform Legislative Review Committee to examine Manitoba's current state of child and family services legislation and produce another report to share with the government on how we can make some changes for the betterment of our families and our kids here in this province. And I'm still a North Ender, so yeah, it's fun to be able to represent the inner city in such a positive way in all the places that I get to go. So that's me.
Bonjour, Anin, Ginui Queen Indigenous, Makwadodam, Duck Bay, Winnipeg, Nandunji. So I told you my spirit name is Golden Eagle Woman. I'm from the Bear Clan, and my family's from Duck Bay, and I grew up in Winnipeg. I'm the MLA for Point Douglas. I was just elected in June in a by-election. So super proud to represent the community that I grew up in. So I grew up in the north end of Winnipeg with a single mother. I know a lot of the issues that existed when I lived there still exist. So really working to change conditions for, Manitobans, but for those that are most vulnerable, that most need our support, and our kids that are in CFS, the child welfare system, we know needs a lot of work. Our government introduced a bill on Wednesday that essentially said that children could not be removed from their homes due to poverty. And basically it was talked out, which is, not something that we wanted to see, because the community needs the support. Families need the support in their homes. I've been an activist for quite some time around missing and murdered Indigenous women, and really looking at changing really how our society views each other, because it's not the government's problem, it's not the police problem, it's a societal problem, and we have to learn to, treat each other with respect, dignity, and to bring that community back that once was here, that village that takes care of one another. Miigwech.
Hello, good morning. My English name is Diane Rusin, and my Anishinaabe name is Nigiguns, which means little otter. And I was fortunate enough to come by that name through Elder Fred Kelly, which is Wob's uncle and out on Wob's territory there. And I just want to thank Elder May and Jamie for starting us that way. I think it's really important that we start our gatherings in the way that we did. And I also want to thank the Institute for passing this tobacco that they passed to us. And again, there's so many teachings, and Wob explained a bit about the tobacco and why we do that and why we work in that way. And I just, whether or not you believe it, the tobacco will work for all of us in this room. So just so you know that, you can have faith. And I also want to thank Bernadette for leading us with that song. I think when we bring the songs forward, there's a lot of teachings in that song and in the drum. And anyway, I just feel that I'm going to a bigger, higher place when we start our gatherings in that way, because I think we spend so much time in our heads, and we do that really, really well, and I do that really, really well. I go there very naturally. It's a defense mechanism. But Elders May talked about working from the heart, and that rings true for me in the work I've done in my community, and just growing up, really working from our heart, our emotion, our spiritual aspect. And as far as who I am, Wob, you're talking about these words, and I don't know that I've ever described myself as an activist. I don't know if that's how I'm being described here, but I'm an Indigenous First Nations woman, and I'm just trying to be me. And by just trying to be me, I guess I have to be an activist. That's pretty crazy, really. So I'm just trying to live according to my values, and I'm trying to make the world a better place according to those values. And I have 2 daughters as well, and I want them to be very strong, Indigenous Ikwe. And I hope they don't get labeled as activists just trying to be that, and be who they are. Or progressive, or whatever words we want to use. I am working on this thing right now called the Winnipeg Boldness Project. It is a research and development project. It's focusing on the Point Douglas neighborhood, Bernadette's constituent neighborhood, and looking at the 0 to 6, and we put all these frames on it, right? 0 to 6, we're looking at school readiness. But for me, at the end of the day, what the project is about is centering Indigenous wisdom. And so it's a very holistic approach. And when we talk about 0 to 6, which is the babies, we cannot talk about the babies without talking about the teenagers and the adults and the seniors. And we can't talk about the babies without talking about the housing and the roads and the infrastructure that is in our communities. And so it's a very comprehensive, complex conversation. And so the other approach, the research approach that this project is using, is this thing called a social innovation social lab. Again, lots of words, but it is a particular methodology that, number one, takes as at its assumption that the systems have a lot of barriers in them, and the systems are the thing that needs changing. And I am a social worker by training. I've been working for and with families all my life, and primarily for Indigenous-led organizations. And I would say there's nothing scientific about this, and don't even get me going about this evidence-based stuff that we all buy into, because there's a lot of stuff being done with no evidence, but it gets all the resources. I would say 25% of the issue out there is an individual capacity problem. And so, you know, our families need some individual capacity development. I say 75% of what's going on out there is the barriers that systems are putting up for our families, right? So we want to make sure that our families have some good supports and services and resources available, but we got to start getting at these systems. And I know we said earlier that, you know, systems are broken. Well, I love Cindy Blackstock. She says systems are not broken. They are not. They're doing exactly what they are set up to do, and that's the thing we need to interrupt and disrupt. So that's the work I'm involved in thinking. I saw the cue from Kyle, so I'm like, okay, stop.
See what I mean? I mean, like we don't have enough time.
And we're out of time.
Yes. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. So I have way too many questions, and we don't have enough time. And I thought, guys, that I would throw out a question to one an individual person, and then one or two other can jump in and kind of build on that answer, and then I'll take it from there. So our first question this morning is, what does having access to power for we Indigenous people look like or mean to you? And I'm going to give that, I'll give it to a lady, so I'll give it to Bernadette.
I'll make which. So I think being in this very space, holding this very mic, having this opportunity to actually talk to people and educate people, I think we need more Indigenous representation all across in government, in labor, in, you know, even in our NDP party. At the school level, I used to be an educational assistant. I would try change systems being an educational assistant. I didn't have a big voice because I didn't have a lot of power in that system. So I went back to school, I became a teacher. And when I became a teacher, then I was able to start making changes. When I started making changes, then I became an administrator. And in that role as an administrator, I was able to make way more changes. So I think, you know, we often equate power to roles. And I think we need to start looking at the Indigenous ways of being, which is everyone's equal. No one has power over anyone else, and that everyone has a voice, and that everyone's voice is valued. And that's how change is going to be made. If we break down these hierarchical systems that we are in, we were talking about fundraising yesterday, and someone said, oh, let's do a car wash. And I was like, I would absolutely do a car wash. Just because I'm an MLA doesn't mean I can't do things like that. Like, I would gladly, you know, roll up my sleeves. I was in my constituency painting our underpass. Like, we need to get into those places and spaces that need leadership, but we also have to open up those spaces so that people can have the opportunity to be leaders. And I look at our young people and where we're at. When I came into the division I was in, first thing we did is we created an Aboriginal education group. And this wasn't just for Aboriginal people, this is for all people. And we started talking about things, actions that we can do, because we can talk, and I hear, you know, reconciliation thrown around all the time, the word. But until we actually put action behind that and, you know, create those places for our young people to be leaders, we're not going to, you know, move in any direction.
So, thank you. And I guess we should say that there's a possibility that Leah will need to step out partially through this. So I'm going to ask you as well. What does having access to power look like for you?
Well, I think before we can talk about access to power, we have to talk about access to basic human rights, something that still is not happening in this country today. Example, you know, right now we see Kinder Morgan pipeline, people are being arrested, not obtaining the free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous peoples. We have a right to be self-determined. We also have a right to our free, prior, and informed consent. Threats of military are being called in. Indigenous women, we have initially 1,200. They're looking at about 4,000 murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls Two-Spirit going missing. Where is that rooted in? Well, it's rooted in the Indian Act and the fact that Indigenous women 2018 still do not have equal rights in this country as other women, never mind men, We don't even have the same rights as Indigenous women. 11,000 kids in care in Manitoba. There's more kids in care now than at the height of residential school. So, you know, when we're talking about power, I mean, I'm all for reconciliation. Hey, it's a wonderful thing, but there's no reconciliation in the absence of justice. There will never be reconciliation in the absence of justice. And I say that not because to be a downer. I know that there's been a lot of focus on trying to stay positive, but I really have difficulty staying positive because being born an Indigenous woman in this place some call Canada is a political act. I was born in the struggle. I continue on in the struggle. I wake up every day and I have to fight in the struggle for basic human rights. Basic human rights for myself and for children and for water and for future generations. So I think, you know, it's important to look at it in that sense. There was another quick point I wanted to make. I think, okay, within that, this is the upside, okay? I'm a bit of a Debbie the Downer for those of you who like Saturday Night Live, okay? That's the Debbie Downer part, okay. The positive part is that more and more Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians are recognizing that injustice that is perpetuated in this country. One example is Bill C-262 that just passed through committee, you know, for the full adoption and implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, a bill that was put forward by Member of Parliament Romeo Saganash. Well, how did that happen? Well, it started off, it was in the tanker, I can tell you that. But people from coast to coast, church groups took up the heed to calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Because as Bernadette said, there's no reconciliation without action. Public pressure, campaigns. Now we're looking at the full adoption and implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People into Canadian to be in or for future laws to be in harmony with the Declaration. Okay, so I think we're moving forward, but actions are only, or words are only as good as actions. So it's good. It's a good first step, but people have to follow up on that. That means that things like Kinder Morgan Pipeline, Muskrat Falls, really dealing head on with the issue of violence against Indigenous women and girls, Two-Spirit, the child welfare crisis, taking our right away to parents our own children, stopping the perpetual genocide that continues on in this country. We need to do that, and then we'll move towards reconciliation. So I think, you know, when we talk about access to power, first we have to talk about access to fundamental basic human rights.
So Diane, I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to ask you because I'm not going to ask the elected politician on the panel at this question, but by all means, feel free to jump in, Bernadette. So Diane, is it important to have Indigenous people seek office and get elected?
Yes.
Why? Why?
Again, I think, and to echo what Bernadette did say, is that we need people all over the place, like at all levels. And so I know there is a conversation, and talk about the Twitter, the dumpster fire that we call Twitter. You know, and Jesse Went, you know, was really eloquent in saying, you know, having to defend who you and what you are every single day is tiring. And so when I go to speak to anybody, someone in elected office or other, having to just defend and describe and, like, you know, where the starting point of that conversation is about who fundamentally am I and what am I about and what are these issues we're talking about and where's my starting point, is tiring. And so when we do have, if I can say, our own in whatever position, you know, I just know that I can start the conversation at a different place often because I know they already understand some fundamental things, and that understanding can often come from an experiential place, not a necessarily theoretical place. And I, you know, in Winnipeg, I've been working in more collaborative spaces than I ever have in my life, and it's tough because I'm coming across a lot of people that have lots of different value systems than I do. They're speaking different languages than I do. I don't understand. They're using the same word, but I don't. But I know they mean something different by that word, and so it takes a lot to try to and to be sort of the only voice at times that comes from that place is very tiring and isolating. And sometimes I start thinking I'm crazy because I'm the only one saying this, and I'm sitting in a circle that nobody else is saying this, and yet fundamentally I know my truth. But so yes, I think we have to have our folks elected.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because I think everybody here in this panel and every other Indigenous person here can relate to that point, is that it is tiring to always have to describe, sometimes defend. We always seem to find ourselves always having to, not, well, like you said, yeah, sometimes it is defending and advocating, but sometimes it's even just educating. Even for people who are allies or want to be allies, you know, having to go over things again and again and again. We're happy to do that, but it does kind of take some of your energy. So I think everybody on this panel, we have or are kind of that professional native person to somebody in some position of power. I know there's a few politicians that will call me up and say, hey, I got a question. What is a pipe ceremony, and what should I do or not do there, so I don't want to look stupid or I don't want to stick out, or hey, I have a question about this aspect. So you're right. It can definitely get exhausting, even when it comes from a really good place. So, Michael, as somebody who I know has passed up opportunities to seek office, why would you say it would be important for Indigenous people to seek office and get elected?
I think it is important to have Indigenous people elected, for sure. But I just think we have a super broken voting system, and I just don't know that just because I vote for somebody that I want that somebody to be speaking for me for the next 4 years. So I just think about how there have been examples in our community where people vote in a very different way. In the inner city, Bernadette mentioned, we have what we call the village. And in the village, we vote when we show up voluntarily at an event to say that I believe that this is important. So if we show up as a volunteer at Drag the Red to say I want to help these individuals search the Red River to look for missing and murdered Indigenous women because the police cannot do so without evidence, then I'm voting with my time, with my energy, with my body. And so to me, that is a certain kind of power. And if we measured the things in the inner city, like Drag the Red, like Bear Clan Patrol, like Meet Me at the Bell Tower, in a more meaningful way, when people came together to stop bad things from happening instead of only measuring when the bad thing happens, then we would have a different understanding of power, of voting, of what an election even is for. And so, yes, it's important to have Indigenous people elected, but it's also important for all of us to vote every single day with our time, with our energy, with our bodies, with our dollars. And so I know that for me, I'm not particularly interested in running for office. I would much rather have good people in office that just listen to me. And I think that that way I can continue my work with the community. But I know that everyone has a different role. I know that people have different journeys. And I know that I would love if Diane or Leah or Kyle, as an example, were to run for office. Because I would really like to, I may or may not have voted for one person already up here on the panel when they ran in my neighborhood. But I guess maybe I'll transition this to a question to the other three people. Is like, will you guys ever consider running? Because I know that for me, right now, until I see election reform, I'm not really interested in running. But I just wonder about Diane, Leah, and Kyle, if you guys ever would consider running, because I think that'll tell you a lot about if it's even valuable, if these smart people here choose to do so or not. So I don't know. Diane, you gonna run?
No.
Yeah. Leah, you gonna run?
No.
Kyle, you gonna run?
To be continued. I'll just say it at that. I heard somebody say definite maybe. Definite maybe.
Interesting.
All right, so I just want to ask another question and move on from that because
We'll move on to something different.
yeah, I'll just say officially no comment. So, but stay tuned. But seriously, we have some really good questions that I want to get through here. So, should it be an important goal for we Indigenous people to get involved in these systems to affect change? Like, obviously, Bernadette, you're affecting change from within our legislative, but I know sometimes as an opposition, it's hard to affect change. So is it important to get more and more Indigenous people to affect change from all the different angles?
Absolutely. As I alluded to before, unless you're in those spaces and at those tables to actually create change, then change isn't going to happen. So it's up to you and each one of you to, make those things happen. And, as we're talking to young people, and I always keep talking about young people, because these are our next generation. And these are the kids that we want to be our activists. Yesterday we had 800 students at the legislative building marching there and supporting Jordan's principle. Those kids are showing their voice and their leadership and demonstrating through action. So, when I was in EA, I didn't have much power. Now I'm an MLA, we're in opposition. We don't have as much power, but we do have a strong voice, and we are keeping this government, we are holding them to task. We are making sure that the public knows about all of the austerity, things that they're doing within government. And we are talking to people about getting involved in politics, because if you're on the outside looking in and you're not involved and you're just kind of being a bystander, you're never going to create change. So we talk about being an upstander. And you don't necessarily have to be an elected official, but you should be talking to your elected officials, whether you agree with them or not, and making sure that you're holding them account. Nick Curry's my elected official in the area I live. And I'm always asking questions about, daycare, for instance. We need more daycare all across Manitoba. And just because I'm elected official doesn't mean he doesn't have to account to me, because I'm one of his constituents. So we absolutely, I remember when I started thinking about running. So in February, Kevin stepped down. I was like, oh, okay, nobody else is going to run. I knew Michael was like, absolutely no, I'm doing some great work in the community, I'm not interested. So talking to some of the community members that were doing some great work, none of them were interested in running. So I was like, okay, I guess it's me. I mean, not that I didn't want to, but I knew there were other people that could do great work as well. And I was doing great work in the area I was. I mean, I was an administrator, it was a comfortable position. But we have to have people at those tables to make those decisions, and have people that are talking to us about what those decisions should be made for our community. So, miigwech.
I just wanted to talk about people power. Like, we talk about title power, but I think there's a lot of power in people power. So we're voters in the room. Some Indigenous people don't choose to vote. I choose to vote. And there's a lot of power in people. Politicians will do what will get them elected. If they know that not making a certain decision is going to lose the election, I'm preaching to the choir here, they're going to do it. They want to win. I think Bill C-262 is a case in point. When we started the lobbying efforts a couple of years ago, it was a clear no. In fact, Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould went up in front of the AFN and said it's just an unrealistic goal. Well, that tune has changed over time from a massive lobby effort that was born out of people power. And I think sometimes we forget how powerful we are as individual people. Part of the reason I've been asked to run many times for many years for all sorts of things, and one of the reasons why I don't run is because I want to keep my individual voice. I don't ever want to feel like I'm in a position where I have to toe party line. I think we need people in all different areas. We need people on the ground, grassroots. I like being grassroots. I like staying there. We need elected officials. We need people in institutions. But we also forget about the silent warriors that are protecting water and land every day. You know, a good friend of mine, Steve Heinrichs, who's the liaison for the Mennonite Church of Canada, just got arrested at Kinder Morgan Pipeline. He's a non-Indigenous person. He's standing in solidarity with Indigenous people, sending a clear message. You know, and people are coming from across the country to protect that land. Something, by the way, and I don't mean to crash the party, is being supported by the NDP government in Alberta. So I think when we look at being progressives, we also have to look at ourselves. I've been NDP. My dad was a CCFer, but I think we also have to look at ourselves and really reflect on even our own participation in violating human rights in this country. And I think we're talking about reconciliation, pathways to reconciliation. There's no reconciliation in the absence of justice. And if the NDP wants to be part of that justice, then they have to absolutely, without question, honor the fundamental human rights of all human beings, including Indigenous peoples on this place some call Canada.
So, Leah, you mentioned that a lot of we Indigenous people, actually don't have high percentages of voting turnout. So I was just wondering, why do we think that is? Diane, why do you think that a lot of Indigenous people don't actually get out and drop their ballot in the ballot box?
Well, and I think people in the room probably have a good sense of that, and I think the reasons are multiple, and so part of it is irrelevancy. Like, people just do not see the relevancy in their daily life, at least the people I work with, if you're talking about Indigenous people. It doesn't affect, they don't see how it affects their daily lives, and I think, again, even more marginalized folks are so busy, you know, battling those systems that, you know, trying to do some of those other things that seem a little bit farther removed from their daily experience is something they're not going to get involved in or spend their time in. I think that there are some barriers in Winnipeg. You know, we've had the rock the vote kind of stuff and trying to mobilize to get people to the polls and everything else, and like just getting transportation, getting ID, like all those practical things are barriers for people to participate in a political process. And then I want to, and I know this is not the genesis of this conversation, but I kind of want to move off it a tiny bit. There are other political systems out there, right? So there are First Nation political systems out there. So that's, okay, one of your questions. But I know we keep, and that was sort of when I was asked to be on the panel and asked what are some of the things I wanted to talk about. It was, well, knowing, you know, the thing I'm always involved in is about centering Indigenous wisdom and Indigenous ways. And so how can we do that within mainstream systems? But then which is a thinking outside the box kind of conversation. But I also am very involved in how do we think inside the circle kinds of conversations, and that's about what are our own governing systems, what are our own political institutions, and how are we involved in that? And same conversation around how do you involve, how efficient is it, what kind of impact does it have? All the same kinds of conversations happen in those circles too. But just so we keep in mind, there are other politics out there.
Yeah, absolutely. You had mentioned that there are barriers to even getting involved politically. And Michael, I know you are involved with kind of rock the vote, all that kind of stuff. So I'd like you to expand on what your thoughts are, these barriers, and how do we get rid of them?
Well, I think the biggest thing that we're missing in this conversation on access to power is discussing the basic concept of access. Right now, if somebody wanted to get involved, Bernadette, we had this conversation before. If somebody wants to get involved with me, meet me at the bell tower, here's the process. Show up. If somebody wants to get involved in the NDP, what's the process? Is it just show up? Is there a form? Is there a fee? Is there an approval process? Is there people that get refused their access? Like, I'm just thinking, like, anyway, so I'm asking a question I don't know the answer to. And maybe I'm making everyone angry, apologies. But the point of what I'm saying is that we can't talk about access to power until we ensure that our work and the things that we're doing are actually accessible to people. And I think that has a lot to do with the actions that we take in between election cycles and what roles we all take up in as helpers in the community to try to build people's system literacy. Because as much as it's important to like get involved, I ain't getting involved in nothing that I don't understand. And the reality is our political system is very difficult to understand, and when there are people that are fighting for their basic human rights, if I have to choose in a day to fight for food or fight to get ID to vote, guess what I'm choosing? I'm fighting for food. And so we have to think realistically about who we're reaching out to, and if we want to reach out to people that are not necessarily represented in elected spaces or whatnot, I think we really have to think about what we're doing to build up people's system literacy. What have you done today? And I want everyone seriously in this room right now to answer this question yourself about what have you done today to build people's understanding of how this political system works, whether you call yourself a progressive, a party member, a helper, an Indigenous leader, whatever you may be. What have you done to teach young people or others that aren't in the room today about how things work so that they can maybe imagine that participating in this process or this system will be of value to them on par with if I'm fighting to get food, if I'm fighting to get a vote, it should be just as valuable to me. But I need to understand.